And I'm at the hour. So, first things first. Oh, I'm a spiral. Why am I a spiral? I was a rat earlier, I double checked. Oh, no. Oh dear. Bear with me a second, I do appear to be some sort of a cogwheel. Yeah, well, while we wait for that to resolve, Nazca, thank you on the 10 stream streak, I really appreciate it. Ooh. Oh dear, we appear to be having some technical difficulties. Bear with us a minute. Sorry about this, folks. Normally I'm better than this, but, well, things is how they is. Except for when they isn't, of course. Right, okay. Okay, first things first. Okay, that's just not looking at all. Okay, why am I a spiral? I was a rat just like 2 minutes ago. I double checked right before we started the stream. Okay. Well, I'm afraid we're just gonna have to bear with that because I cannot fix it. So I hope it doesn't bother you too badly. I promise you, normally I'm a very attractive little rat, but well, things being what they are, there's nothing to be done about it. As assuming, of course, the people can still hear and see me. God. Can't even be sure of that, can I? Right, okay. First things first, what we've done. Okay, so that's just going to have to happen for the time being. Nothing to be done about it. So, first things first. Okay, that's good. So I'm not... It's just the few years for now. Sometimes when that doesn't work, I think it's just because other stuff goes wrong. I've had a couple of issues leading into this, but yeah. I don't know. I've got to figure something else out, but I just don't know. Alright, anyway, for now, so... Checklist. Yeah, let's do the checklist first. Hopefully this will resolve itself. If it doesn't, I guess we'll do another bear stream. So, yeah, so first thing first, new followers, yeah, gotta thank Uzumaki, who followed me sometime between end of last stream and the beginning of this one. I always appreciate it. Love to shout out someone who follows me. No badges today, because I didn't decide exactly what we were doing until I literally had to type in the title of the stream tonight, which I think, looking at it, I might have misspelled. Well, here's what it is. Yeah, next on the checklist, Nazca. That's the wrong thing. Nazca, thank you for calling first. Fitz, if you are here, I'm afraid it's a cutthroat world. Things just start. Yeah, let's get him up top there. Oh, now the whole screen is black. Oh dear. Very bad. Okay. Don't know what's going on there. Magic is going alright tonight, folks. Okay. Oh, okay. So the library's back. That's something. I'm still not showing up for some reason. I don't know why. Oh, and the music's cutting out. That's always a good sign. You know, you love to make sure that the music is cutting in out. You know, gives a certain level of, you know, discordant ambiance. You know, I mean, it's always good for me when I hear the music going out because it tells me the wards are failing and I am in imminent danger, which I guess is actually a good thing because it means that I'm aware of it. But yeah. Well, you know what they say, folks. You're not scuffing, you're not streaming. So we're certainly streaming tonight. Okay, that's as good as it's going to get. Change the help. No, okay. Oh, no, I just disappeared. Never mind. Right, well. yeah, there's nothing to be done about this that I can do. So, on with the show. On with the show, I guess. So first things first. Oh, suddenly I'm back to being around. No idea how that happens. No idea how anything works. I don't understand anything. Lamp does all the technical stuff. I am just afraid. But yeah, so it's working now. So let's. What are we doing? Yeah. There I am. I don't understand how any of this happens. But yeah. So first things first. What are we doing? Working through some ideas, some problems, something. Checklist. Right. Okay. So we've done. Which means the next is I'm supposed to show you guys any new books that we got in. Have we got any new books? And we have.
Oh, the rat!
Abe, good to have you. You're just in time to avoid all the horrible stuff that's going on. Yeah, good to have you, yeah? Right, so first mark, thank the followers, no badges. Right. Right. New books, yes. Okay, so there are some new books. If you're on the library screen, you can see just below me, on the second to last shelf in the column that I'm in, there are 4 new books, and yeah, well, could be worse. Let's see. Yeah, and I guess let's go have a look at them, shall we? Oh yeah, I should probably go over there. Yeah, so if we are over here, you'll be able to see you'll be able to see if I move my fat self. I'm being very uncooperative tonight, not appearing. Yeah. You'll see there we got 4 new books. These being the Analects, the Book of Lord Shang, the Mosey, and the Tao Te Ching, which Lamp tells me are the 4 seminal works of the 4 primary schools of Chinese philosophy. Which, hopefully that should be exciting. Yeah, meaning to what am I meaning to do? I'm meaning to at some point go over those. Don't know when I'll do that, but at some point I want to. The music's going again. Well, that's a no. Yeah. I think it'll be interesting. I enjoyed doing the philosophy the other night when we did the Montaigne, so I thought, try and sort that out. Speaking of things or books I've been looking for. Oh no, I'm gone again. Well, while I'm gone, let's go over here. These are going to be tonight's books. I should have been over here already, but I just wasn't. So yeah. But yeah. Well, while I'm not here, let's go back over there. I do not know what's going on tonight. Just all over the place. But yeah. Okay. So while I'm not here, oh yeah, that's the other thing I went to talk about tonight. So I mentioned, I think a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, at some point in the last couple of weeks, that for my big 100th stream, I had a couple of ideas. Namely, I mentioned that I was looking at maybe doing something sort of a more ASMR vibe for Torrid Tuesdays, or if I missed a stream this week and the 100th ended up being the one after, I was going to look at getting a copy of The Hobbit that I'd had my eyes on, which I thought would be a nice relevant text. So I did try and get that copy of The Hobbit today. Turns out, I'm back, good. But yeah, turns out that copy of The Hobbit, book mimic. One of those objects possessed by a demon wasn't actually a copy of The Hobbit. Seemed to be some sort of blank notebook. So yeah, it did try and eat me, and it wasn't a copy of The Hobbit. So yeah, looks like we're not doing The Hobbit. So the plan for now is I'm going to be doing this Story Tuesday, a slightly more ASMR, close to the mic style reading, where I try and make it a little bit more, sensual, like feely, that sort of thing. And then depending on whether folks like that or don't like that, I also have my 50 follower count coming up. So my thought is that we'll do that this Tuesday, and if people like it, then as a follower goal for 50 followers, we'll have another Torrid Tuesday in the same style as a reward. And if people don't like it, then I'll do the next Torrid Tuesday in that style, unless we get 50 followers. That's right, carrot and stick, baby. We're doing both kinds of rewards and punishments. So yeah. So if you're interested in hearing SkitterSkreetch read some of Jane Austen's Emma up close to the mic and talking like this, then tune in this Tuesday, because we'll be doing that. Here's the plan. Oh, okay. What else? Okay, it's already at 10 past the hour, so... Fitz, good to have you. Congratulations on the 7-stream streak. Wilde did stick to her promise and try and save first of you, but unfortunately, while she was honourable, not every other member of chat is. And I can't say I blame them. Good rat instincts. Person who stole that from Fitz, and who I won't name. I'm not a snitch. Anyway. But yeah, so, it's 10 minutes past the hour. We've scuffed all over the place, and I've talked a bit about plans. Plague! Good to have you too. But yeah, but yeah, so thanks to Uzumaki, Nazca got first, no badges, new books that we've shown, copies of the False Philosophies, different up close special reading of Emma for the 100th stream. If you like it, we'll do it again if we get 50. If you don't like it, we won't do it again if we get 50. That's everything. That's all the stuff I need to say. It's 10 minutes, but it's already 11 minutes. Whoa. Man, scuffing makes it way easier to fill time. Hey, no worries at all, Blake. Have a good time. Enjoy. Yeah. Yeah. Whoa. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So the scuff is over. Planet. Yeah, we're doing. What are we doing today? I decided that's right, not these. Well, I should also move from here because I've read all the ones in here. Before that, oh no, I've immediately stopped being here again. That's awful. Oh, and I'm back again. I can't make up my mind. Right, okay, anyway, no, this room's, okay, so. First things first, let's have a quick swallow of water because my throat is starting to feel it. I've been panic talking. There we are. Second thing second. What are we reading tonight? That's right. So we're going to be reading a collection of. I appreciate the thought fits, but again, not eating cheese, not anymore. I'm not taking suggestions of that. Yeah, so, yeah. So we're going to be reading a collection of short stories by Oscar Wilde. Specifically, the 4 of them held in the volume known as the Pomegranate, or the House of Pomegranates. Sorry. Which, yeah, those 4 short stories. These were, I'm told, originally intended for children, though based on the last collection of Oscar Wilde children's stories we had, Oscar Wilde did not particularly like children, because they were very sad. But they're pretty good, so we'll do them, and then, depending on how we feel, I sort of feel like going long tonight, so if we're still feeling good afterwards, I might switch over to some of the M.R. Jameses, some of the other stuff we got around. We'll see how we feel. But yeah. Other than that, buckle in, settle down, get comfortable, make yourselves at home, grab yourselves a drink, get yourself a blanket, have your stuffies close at hand to cuddle if you feel like it. Yeah, well, words and words. Okay, yeah, oh, no. I always forget I've got a little pad. I never forget. What am I doing? Yes, so, as always, if at any point you fail to hear something that has been said in the story, you've missed something, because either I've stumbled over it or skipped it, you think, well, there's been a little thing. Bye, Wild, thank you for stopping by, I do appreciate it so much. Yeah, I've missed something, stumbled over it, there's been intelligence, any reason you need me to go back over, let me know, I'm always happy to. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, I'll be stopping after each little one of these to have a drink and maybe do a little bit of talk, so that's a great time to do it. And if you want to just ask throughout the story, I'll keep an eye on them. I'm always happy to chat and talk, but you know, we'll see how we go. Yeah, that's about it. So without any further ado, unless anyone has anything they particularly want of me, then as so long as you are all sitting comfortably, I shall begin. The birthday of the Infanta. Is that right? No, I skipped one. Ooh. Let's get to the right one first. Yeah. The young king. The lady to Margaret Lady Brooke. It was the night before the day fixed for his coronation, and the young king was sitting alone in his beautiful chamber. His courtiers had all taken their leave of him, bowing their heads to the ground, according to the ceremonious usage of the day, and had retired to the great hall of the palace to receive a few last lessons from the professor of etiquette, there being some of them who would steal quite natural manners, which in a courtier is, I hardly need say, a very grave offence. The lad, for he were only a lad, being but 16 years of age, were not sorry at their departure, and had flung himself back with a deep sigh of relief on the soft cushions of his embroidered couch, lying there, wild-eyed and open-mouthed, like a brown woodland fawn, or some young animal of the forest, newly snared by the hunters. And indeed, it was the hunters who had found him, coming upon him almost by chance, as, a bare-limbed and pipe in hand, he was following a flock of the poor goatherd who had brought him up, and whose son he had always fancied himself to be. The child of the old king's only daughter by a secret marriage with one much beneath her in station, a stranger some said, who, by the wonderful magic of his lute-playing, had made the young princess love him, while others spoke of an artist from Rimini, for whom the princess had shown much, perhaps too much, honour, and who had suddenly disappeared from the city, leaving his work in the cathedral unfinished. He had been, when but a week old, stolen away from his mother's side, as she slept, and given into the charge of a common peasant and his wife, who were without children of their own, and lived in a remote part of the forest, on the day's ride from the town. Grief for the plague, as the court physician stated, or as some suggested, a swift Italian poison administered in a cup of spiced wine, slew within an hour of her awakening the white girl who had given him birth, and as the trusty messenger who bare the child across his saddlebow stooped from his weary house and knocked at the door of the goatherd's hut, the body of the princess was being lowered into an open grave that had been dug in a deserted churchyard beyond the city grate, a grave where it was said that another body were also lying, that of a young man of marvellous and foreign beauty, whose hands was tied behind him with a knotted cord, and whose breast was stabbed with many red wounds. Such, at least, the small story that men whispered to each other. Certain it were that the old king, when on his deathbed, where moved by remorse for his great sin, or merely desiring that his kingdom should not pass away from his line, he had the lad sent for, and, in the presence of the council, had acknowledged him as his heir. And it seems that from the very first moment of his recognition, he had shown signs of that strange passion for beauty that was destined to have been so great an influence over his life. Those who accompanied him, the suite of his room set apart for his service, often spoke of the cry of pleasure that broke from his lips when he saw the delicate raiment and rich jewels that had been prepared for him, and the almost fierce joy with which he flung aside his rough leather, tunic, and coarse sheepskin cloak. He missed indeed at times the fine freedom of his forest life, and were always apt to chafe at the tedious court ceremonies that occupied so much of each day. But the wonderful palace, joyeuse as they called it, of which he now found himself lord, seemed to him a new world, fresh fashioned for his delight. And as soon as he could escape from the council hall, their audience chamber, he would run down the great staircase with its lions of gilt bronze and steps of bright porphyry, and wander from room to room, and from corridor to corridor, like one who was seeking to find in beauty an anodyne from pain, a sort of restoration from sickness. Upon these journeys of discovery, as he would call them, and indeed there were to him real voyages through a marvellous land, he would sometimes be accompanied by the slim, fair-haired court page, with their floating mantles and gay fluttering ribbons, but more often he'd be alone, feeling through a certain quick instinct, and was almost a divination, that the secrets of art are best learned in secret, and that beauty, like wisdom, loves the lonely worshipper. Many curious stories was related about him at the period. It was said that a stout burgomaster, who had come to deliver a florid oratorical address on behalf of the citizens of the town, had caught sight of him kneeling in real adoration before a great picture that had just been brought from Venice, and seemed to herald the worship of some new gods. On another occasion he had been missed for several hours, and after a lengthened search he had been discovered in a little chamber in one of the northern turrets of the palace, gazing, as one in a trance, at a Greek gem carved with the figure of Adonis. He had been seen, so the tale ran, pressing his warm lips to the marble brow of an antique statue that had been discovered in the bed of the river on the occasion of the building of the stone bridge, and were inscribed with the name of the Bithynian slave of Adrian. He had passed an whole night in nothing but noting the effect of the moonlight on a silver image of Endymion. All rare and costly materials had certainly a great fascination for him, and in his eagerness to procure them he had sent away many merchants, some to traffic for amber with the rough fisher folk of the northern seas, some to Egypt to look for that curious green turquoise which is only found in the tombs of kings, and it is said to possess the magical properties, some to Persia for silken carpets and painted pottery, and others to India to buy gauze and stained ivory, moonstones and bracelets of jade, sandalwood and blue enamel, and shawls of farm wool. But what had occupied him most were the robe he would wear at his coronation, the robe of tissued gold, and the ruby-studded crown, and the sceptre with its rows and rings of pearls. Indeed, it were of this that he were thinking tonight, as he lay back on his luxurious couch, watching the great palm-wood log that were burning itself out in the open hearth. The designs, which was from the hands of the most famous artists of the time, had been submitted to him many months before. He had given orders that the artificers were to toil night and day to carry them out, and that the whole world would be searched for jewels that would be worthy of their work. He saw himself in fancy standing at the high altar of the cathedral, in the fair raiment of a king, and a smile played and lingered about his boyish lips, and lit up with a bright lustre his dark woodland eyes. After some time he rose from his seat, and leaning against the carved penthouse of the chimney, looked round at the dimly lit room. The walls were hung with rich tapestries representing the triumph of beauty. A large press inlaid with agate and lapis lazuli filled one corner. Facing the window stood a curiously wrought cabinet with lacquer panels of powdered and mosaic gold, on which was placed some delicate goblet of Venetian glass and a cup of dark-veined onyx. Pale poppies was broidered on the silk coverlet of the bed, as though they had fallen from their tired hands asleep, and tall reeds of fluted ivory bare up the velvet canopy, from which great tufts of ostrich plumes sprang, like white foam with the pallid silver of the fretted ceiling. A laughing narcissus in green bronze held a polished mirror above its head. On the table stood a flat bowl of amethyst. Outside he could see the huge dome of the cathedral, looking like a bubble over the shadow houses, and the weary sentinels pacing up and down on the mighty terrace by the river. Far away, in an orchard, a nightingale was singing. A faint perfume of jasmine came through the open window. He brushed his brown curls back from his forehead, and taking up a lute, let his fingers stray across the chords. His heavy eyelids drooped, and a strange languor came over him. Ne'er before had he felt so keenly, or with such exquisite joy, the magic and the mystery of beautiful things. When midnight sounded from the clockwork tower, he touched a bell, and his pages entered and disrobed him with much ceremony, pouring rosewater over his hands and strewing flowers on his pillow. A few minutes after that they had left the room, and he fell asleep. And as he slept he dreamed a dream, and this was his dream. He thought that he was standing in a long, low attic, amidst the whirl and clatter of many looms. The meagre daylight peered in through the gated windows, and showed him the gaunt figures of the weaver, bending over their cases. Pale, sickly-looking children was crouched on the huge crossbeams. As the shuttles dashed through the warp, they lifted up the heavy battens, and when the shutters stopped, they let the battens fall and pressed the threads together. Their faces was pinched with famine, their thin hands shook and trembled. Some haggard women were seated at a table sewing. An horrible odour filled the place. The air was foul and heavy, and the walls dripped and steamed with damp. The young king went over to one of the weavers and stood by and watched him. And the weaver looked at him angrily and said, "Why art thou watching me? Art thou a spy sent on us by our master?" "Who is thy master?" asked the young king. "Our master," cried the weaver bitterly. "He is a man like myself. Indeed, there is but this difference between us, that he wears fine clothes while I go in rags, and that while I am weak from hunger, he suffers not a little from overfeeding." "The land is free," said the young king, "and thou art no man's slave." "In war," answered the weaver, "the strong make slaves of the weak, and in peace the rich make slaves of the poor. We must work to live, and they give us such means and wages that we die. We toil for them all day long, and they heap up gold in their coffers, and our children fade away before their time, and the faces of those we love become hard and evil. We tread out the grapes, and another drinks the wine. We sow the corn and our own board is empty. We have chains that no eye beholds them, and our slaves don't men call us free. Is it so with all? He asked. It is so with all, answered the weaver, with the young as well as with the old, with the women as well as with the men, with the little children as well as with those who are stricken in years. The merchants grind us down, and we must needs do their bidding. The priest rides by and tells his head, and tells his beads, and no man has care of us. Though our sunken lanes creep poverty with her hungry eyes, and sin with his sodden face follows close behind her. Misery wakes us in the morning, and shame sits with us at night. What are these things to thee? Thou art not one of us, thy face is too happy. And he turned away scowling, and threw the shuttle across the loom, and the young king saw that it were threaded with a thread of gold. And a great terror seized upon him, and he said to the weaver, What is this robe that you are weaving? It is the robe for the coronation of the young king, he answered. What is there to thee? And the young king gave a loud cry, and woke, and lo, he were in his own chamber, and through the window he saw the great honey-coloured moon hanging in the dusky air. And he fell asleep again, and dreamed, and this was his dream. He thought that he were lying on the deck of a huge galley that was being rowed by 100 slaves. On a carpet by his side, the master of the galley was seated. He was black as ebony, his turban were of crimson silk. Great earrings of silver dragged down the thick lobes of his ears, and in his hands he had a pair of ivory scales. The slaves was naked, but for a ragged loincloth, and each man was chained with his neighbour. The hot sun beat brightly upon them, and the negroes ran up and down the gangway and lashed them with whips of hide. They stretched out their lean arms and pulled the heavy oars through the water. The salt spray flew from the blades. At last they reached a little bay and began to take surrounding. A light wind blew from the shore and covered the deck. The great lantern sailed with a fine red dust. 3 Arabs mounted on wild asses rode out and threw spears at them. The master of the galley took a painted bow in his hand and shot one of them in the throat. He fell heavily into the surf. His companions galloped away. A woman wrapped in a yellow veil followed slowly on a camel, looking back now and then at the dead body. As soon as they had cast anchor and hauled down the sail, the negroes went into the hold and brought up a long rope ladder, heavily weighted with lead. The master of the galley threw it over the side, making his ends fast to 2 iron stanchions. Then the negro seized the youngest of the slaves, and knocked his guards off and filled his nostrils and ears with wax, and tied a big stone around his waist. He crept warily down the ladder and disappeared into the sea. A few bubbles rose where he sunk. Some of the other slaves peered curiously over the side. As the prow of the galley sat a shark charmer. At the brow of the galley sat a shark charmer, beating monotonously upon a drum. After some time the diver rose up out of the water, and clung panting to the ladder, with a pearl in his right hand. The negro seized it from him, and thrust him back. The slaves fell asleep over their oars. Again and again he came up, and each time that he did so he brought with him a beautiful pearl. The master of the galley weighed them, and put them into a little bag of green leather. The young king tried to speak, but his tongue seemed to cleave the roof of his mouth, and his lips refused to move. The negroes chatted to each other and began to quarrel over a string of bright beads. 2 cranes flew round and round of the vessel. And then the diver come up for the last time, and the pearl that he brought with him was fairer than all the other pearls, and all the pearls of Ormuz, for it was shaped like the full moon and whiter than the morning star. But his face was strangely pale, and as he fell upon the deck, the blood gushed from his ears and nostrils. He queered for a little, and then he was still. The negroes shrugged their shoulders and threw the body overboard. And the master of the galley laughed, and reaching out, he took the pearl. And when he saw it, he pressed it to his forehead and bowed. "It shall be," he said, "with the sceptre of the young king." He made a sign to the negroes to draw up the anchor. When the young king heard this, he gave a great cry and woke. Through the window he saw the long grey fingers of the dawn clutching at the fading stars. And he fell asleep again and dreamed. and this was his dream. He thought that he were wandering through a dim wood, hung with strange fruits, with beautiful poisonous flowers. The adders hissed at him as he went by, and the bright parrots flew screaming from branch to branch. Huge tortoises lay asleep upon the hot mud. The trees was full of apes and peacocks. On and on he went, till he reached the outskirts of the wood, and there he saw an immense multitude of men toiling in the bed of a dried-up river. They swarmed up the crag like ants. They dug deep pits in the ground and went down into them. Some of them cleft rocks with great axes, others grabbed in the sand. They tore up the cactus by its roots and trampled on the scarlet blossoms. They hurried about, calling to each other, and no man were idle. From the darkness of a tavern, Death and Avarice watched them, and Death said, "I am weary. Give me a third of them and let me go." Avarice shook her head. "They are my servants," she answered. And Death said to her, "What hast thou in thy hand?" "I have 3 grains of corn," she answered. "What is that to me?" "Give me one of them," cried Death, "to plant in my garden. Only one of them, and I will go away." "I will not give thee anything," said Avarice, and she hid her hands in the fold of her raiment. And Death laughed, took a cup, and dipped it into a pool of water, and out of the cup rose Org. She passed through the great multitude, and a third of them lay dead. A cold mist followed her, and the water snakes ran by her side. When Avarice saw that a third of the multitude were dead, she beat her breast and wept. She beat her barren bosom and cried aloud, "Thou hast slain a third of my servants," she cried. "Get thee gone. There is war in the mountains of the Tartary. The kings of each side are calling to thee. The Afghans have slain the Black Ox and are marching to battle. They have beaten upon their shields with their spears. They have put on their helmets of iron. What is my valley to thee, that thou shouldst tarry in it? Get thee gone, and come here no more." "Nay," answered Death, "but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go." But Avarice shut her hand and clenched her teeth. "I will not give thee anything," she muttered. And Death laughed and took up a black stone and threw it into the forest. And out of the thicket of wild hemlock came Fever in a robe of flame. She passed through the multitude and touched them, and each man that she touched died. The grass withered beneath her feet as she walked. And Avarice shuddered and put ashes on her head. "Thou art cruel," she cried. "Thou art cruel. There is famine in the walled cities of India, and the cisterns of Samarkand have run dry. There is famine in the walled cities of Egypt, and the locusts have come up from the desert. The Nile has not overflowed its banks, and the priests have cursed Isis and Osiris. Get thee gone to those who need thee, and leave me but my servants." "Nay," answered Death, "but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go." "I will not give thee anything," said Avarice. And Death laughed again, and he whistled through his fingers, and a woman came flying through the air. Plague were written upon her forehead. A crowd of lean vultures wheeled around her. She covered the valley with her wings, and no man were left alive. And Avarice fled shrieking through the forest, and Death leapt upon his red horse and galloped away. His galloping were faster than the wind. And out of the slime at the bottom of the valley crept dragons and horrible things with scales, and the jackals come trotting along the sand, sniffing up the air with their nostrils. And then the young king wept, and said, "Who are these men, and for what are they seeking?" "For rubies, for a king's crown," answered one who stood behind him. And the young king started, and turning around he saw a man habited as a pilgrim, and holding in his hand the mirror of silver. And he grew pale and said, "For what king?" And the pilgrim answered, "Look in this mirror, and thou shalt see him." And he looked in the mirror, and seeing his own face, he gave a great cry and woke. A bright sunlight was streaming into the room, and from the trees of the garden, pleasant, the birds were singing. Pause in a moment here to have a quick swallow of water. pressing on. And the chamberlain and the high officers of state come in and made obeisance to him. And the pages brought him the robe of tissued gold, and set the crown and the sceptre before him. And the young king looked at them, and they was beautiful. More beautiful was they than aught he had e'er seen. He remembered his dream, and he said to his lords, "Take these things away, for I will not wear them." And the courtiers were amazed, and some of them laughed, for they thought he were jesting. But he spoke sternly to them again, and said, "Take these things away and hide them from me. It will be the day of my coronation, I will not wear them. For on the loom of sorrow, and by the white hands of pain has this my robe been woven. There is blood in the art of the ruby, and death in the art of the pearl." And he told them his 3 dreams. And when the courtiers heard them, they looked at each other and whispered, saying, "Surely he is mad. What is a dream but a dream, and a vision but a vision? They are not real things, and one should eat them, and one should eat them. And what have we to do with the lives of those who toil for us? Shall a man not eat bread till he has seen the sower, nor drink wine till he has talked with a vine dresser?" And the chamberlain spake to the young king, and said, "My lord, I pray thee set aside these black thoughts of thine, and put on this fair robe, and set this fine crown upon thy head. For how should the people know that thou art a king, if thou hast not king's raiment? And the young king looked at him. "Is it so indeed?" he questioned. "Will they not know me for a king if I have not king's raiment?" "They will not know thee, my lord," cried the chamberlain. I thought there had been many who were king-like," he answered. "But it may be as thou sayest, and yet I will not wear this robe, nor will I be crowned with this crown. But even as I come to the palace, so will I go forth from it." And he bade them all leave him, save one page, and he kept his companion, a lad a year younger than himself. Him he kept for his service, and when he had bathed himself in clear white water, he opened a great painted chest, and from it he took the leather tunic and rough sheepskin cloak that he had worn when he had watched on the hillside of the shaggy goats of the goat herd. This he put on, and in his hand he took his rude shepherd's staff. And the little page opened his big blue eyes in wonder, and said smiling to him, "My lord, I see thy robe and thy sceptre, but where is thy crown?" And the young king plucked a spray of wild briar that were climbing over the balcony, and bent it, and made a circle of it, and set it upon his own head. "This shall be my crown," he answered. And thus attired he passed out of the chamber into the great hall, where the nobles was waiting for him. And the nobles made merry, and some of them cried out to him, "My lord, the people wait for their king, and thou showest them a beggar." And others were wroth, and said, "He brings shame upon our state, and is unworthy to be our master." He answered them not a word, but passed on, and went down the bright that porphyry staircase, and out through the gates of bronze, and mounted upon his horse, and rode towards the cathedral, the little page running beside him. And the people laughed and said, "He is the king's fool who is riding by," and they mocked him. And he drew rein and said, "Nay, but I am the king." And he told them his 3 dreams. And a man came out of the crowd and spoke bitterly to him, and said, "Sir, knowest thou not that out of the luxury of the rich comes the life of the poor? By your pomp we are nurtured, and your vices give us bread. To toil for a hard master is bitter, but to have no master to toil for is more bitter still. Thinkest thou that thy ravens will feed us? And what cure hast thou for these things? Will I say to the buyer, I shall buy for him so much, and to the seller, thou shalt sell at this price? I trow not. Therefore go back to thy palace, and put on the purple and fine linen. What hast thou to do with us, and we who suffer?" "Are not the rich and the poor brothers?" asked the young king. "Aye," answered the man, "and the name of the rich brothers is Cain." And the young king's eyes filled with tears, and he rode on through the murmurs of the people, and the little page grew afraid and left him. And when he reached the great portal of the cathedral, the soldiers thrust their elbows out and said, "What dost thou seek here? None enters by this door but the king." And his face flushed with anger, and he said to them, "I am the king," and waved their elbows aside and passed in. And when the old bishop saw him coming in his goat-herd's dress, he rose up in wonder from his throne, and went to meet him, and said to him, "My son, is this a king's apparel? And with what crown shall I crown thee?" And what sceptre shall I place in thy hand? Surely there should be to be a day of joy for thee, not a day of abasement. So joy aware what grief has fashioned, said the young king, and he told him his 3 dreams. And when the bishop had heard them, he knit his brows and said, My son, I am an old man, and in the winter of my days, and I know that many evil things are done in the wide world. The fierce robbers came down from the mountains, carry off the little children and sell them to the Moors. The lions lie in wait for the caravans and leap upon the camels. The wild boar roots up the corn in the valley, and the foxes gnaw the vines upon the hills. The pirates lay waste to the sea coast and burn the ships of the fishermen, and take their nets from them. In the salt marshes live the lepers. They have houses of wattled reeds, and none may come nigh them. The beggars wander through the cities and eat their food with the dogs. Canst thou make these things not to be? Wilt thou take the leper for thy bedfellow, and see the beggar at thy board? Shall the lion do thy bidding, and the wild boar obey thee? Is not he who made misery wiser than thou art? Wherefore I praise thee not, and that this thou hast done, but I bid thee ride back to the palace, and make thy face glad, and put on the raiment that was beseemeth a king. And with the crown of gold I will crown thee, and the sceptre of pearl will I place in thy hand. And as for thy dream, think no more of them. The burdens of this world are too great for one man to bear, and the world's sorrow is too heavy for one heart to suffer. Sayest ye that in this house? Said the young king. He strode past the bishop, and climbed up the steps of the altar, and stood before the image of Christ. He stood before the image of Christ, and on his right hand and on his left were marvellous vessels of gold, the chalice with the yellow wine and the vial with the holy oil. He knelt before the image of Christ, and the great candle burned brightly by the bejewelled shrine, and the smoke of the incense curled in thin blue wreaths through the dome. He bowed his head in prayer. The priests in their stiff copes crept away from the altar. And suddenly a wild tumult came from the street outside, and in entered the nobles with drawn swords and nodding plumes and shields of polished steel. Where is this dreamer of dreams? They cried. Where is the king who was apparelled like a beggar? This boy who brings shame upon our state. Surely we will slay him, for he is unworthy to rule over us. And the young king bowed his head again and prayed. And when he had finished his prayer, he rose up, and turning round, he looked at him sadly. And lo, through the painted windows come the sunlight streaming upon him, and the sunbeams wove round him a fish-hued robe that were fairer than the robe that had been fashioned for his pleasure. The dead staff blossomed, and bare lilies that was whiter than pearls. The dry thorn blossomed with bare roses that was redder than rubies. Whiter than fine pearls were the lilies, and their stems were a bright silver. Redder than male rubies was the roses, and the leaves were of beaten gold. He stood there in the raiment of a king, and the gates of the jewelled shrine flew open, and from the crystal the many-rayed monstrances shone a marvellous and mystical light. And stood there in a king's raiment, and the glory of God filled the place, and the saints in the carven niches seemed to move. In the fair raiment of a king he stood before them, and the organ pealed out its music, and the trumpeters blew upon their trumpets, and the singing boys sang. And the people fell upon their knees in awe, and the nobles sheathed their swords and did homage, and the bishop's face grew pale, and his hands trembled. "A greater than I have crowned thee," he cried, and knelt before him. And the young king came down from the high altar, and passed home through the midst of the people. But no man dared look upon his face, for it were like the face of an angel. And in sends the young king. I'll have a swallow of water before I get my thoughts on that one. What I say then is this, first of all. It's not as heartbreakingly sad as the prior. But what it is, how'd you say, equally in sort of the way of being concerned with God or the divine. This idea of Christian morality runs through it, which it ran through some of the older ones as well. But even not being as sad as the first lot, it's a pretty grim tale for a children's story, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to say otherwise, of course. And it's a very relevant story today, of course, you know. Consumption, the price of things we have, where things come from, is as relevant today as it was ever before, perhaps even more so. While some things that are done today aren't as practiced as much. There are labour standards, and slavery is illegal in most places. Still, it happens. Things must come from somewhere. And what we enjoy, well, what does it cost others? Something to think on. Though I will somewhat disagree with the conclusion. To reject all things, to deny them with no plan, to bear all the weight of the sorrow of the world, and do nothing by it. Here it is rewarded, because God steps in and intervenes, and grants glory and sainthood. But in the real world that does not change things. All you are left is with sad misery, bereft of things that you once enjoyed. A balance is to be struck here, but it's hard to find it. Now, enough on that, I think. On to the next one, I suppose. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today, I feel like, but well, I still want to get through all these, so press on. The birthday of the Infanta, to Mrs. William H. Grenfell, Taplow Court. It was the birthday of the Infanta. She was just 12 years of age, and the sun was shining brightly in the gardens of the palace. Although she were a real princess and the Infanta of Spain, she had only one birthday every year, just like the children of quite poor people. So it was naturally a matter of great importance to the old country, and she really should have a really fine day for the occasion. And a really fine day it certainly was. The tall striped tulips stood straight up on their stalks, like long rows of soldiers, looked defiantly across the grass at the roses and said, "We are quite as splendid as you now." The purple butterflies fluttered about, with gold dust on their wings, visiting each flower in turn. The little lizards crept out of the crevices of the wall and lay basking in the white glare. And the pomegranates split and cracked with the heat, and showed their bleeding red hearts. Even the pale yellow lemons that hung in such profusion from the mouldering trellis and along the dim arcades seemed to have caught a richer colour from the wonderful sunlight, and the magnolia trees opened their great globe-like blossoms of folded ivory and filled the air with a sweet heavy perfume. The little princess herself walked up and down the terrace with her companions and played at hide and seek round the stone vases and the old moss-grown statues. On ordinary days she were only allowed to play with children of her own rank, so she had always to play alone, but her birthday were an exception, and the king had given orders that she would invite any of her young friends whom she liked to come and amuse themselves with her. There was a stately grace about these slim Spanish children as they glided about, the boys with their large plumed hats and short fluttering cloaks, the girls holding up their trains of their long brocaded gowns and shielding the sun from their eyes with huge bands of black and silver. But the Infanta were the most graceful of all, and the most tastefully attired, after the somewhat cumbrous fashion of the day. Her robe were a grey satin, the skirt and the wide puff sleeves heavily embroidered with silver, and the stiff corset studded with rows of fine pearls. Two tiny slippers with big pink rosettes peeped out beneath her dress as she walked. Pink and pearl were a great gauze fan, and in her hair, which like an aureole of faded gold, so that stiffly round her pale little face, she had a beautiful white rose. From a window in the palace, the sad, melancholy king watched them. Behind him stood his brother, Don Pedrito, God of Aragon, whom he hated, and his confessor, the Grand Inquisitor of Granada, sat by his side. Sadder even than usual the king, for as he looked at the Infanta, bound with childish gravity to the assembling courtiers, or laughing behind her fan at the grim Duchess of Albuquerque, who always accompanied her, he thought of the young queen, her mother, who but a short time before, so it seemed to him, had come from the gay country of France, and withered away in the sombre splendour of the Spanish court, dying just 6 months after the birth of her child, And before she had seen the almonds blossom twice in the orchard, or pluck the second year's fruit from the old gnarled fig tree that stood in the centre of the now grass-grown courtyard. So great had been his love for her that he had not suffered even the grave to hide her from him. She had been embalmed by a Moorish physician, who in return for this service had been granted his love, which for heresy and suspicion of magical practices had been already forfeited, men said, to the Holy Office, and her body was still lying on its tapestried bier in the black marble chapel of the palace, just as the monks had borne her in on that windy March day nearly 12 years before. Once every month the king, wrapped in a dark cloak and with a muffled lantern in his hand, went in and knelt by her side, calling out, "Mirena, Mirena," and sometimes breaking through the formal etiquette that in Spain governs every separate action of life, and sets limits even to the sorrows of a king. He would clutch at the pale, jewelled hands, and in a wild agony of grief, and try to wake her by mad kisses the cold, painted face. The day he seemed to see her again, as he had seen her first at the castle of Fontainebleau, when he was but 15 years of age, and she still younger. They had been fully betrothed on that occasion by the papal nuncio in the presence of the French king, and all in the court, and he had returned to the Escurial bearing with him a little ringlet of yellow hair, and the memory of two childish lips bending down to kiss his hand as he stepped into his carriage. Later on, as he had followed the marriage, hastily performed at Burgos, a small town at the frontier between the two countries, and the grand public entry into Madrid, with the customary celebrations of our Mass at the church, or La Doce, and a more than usually solemn auto de fe, in which nearly 300 heretics, amongst whom were many Englishmen, had been delivered over to the secular arm to be burned. Certainly he had loved her madly, and the ruin, many thought, of his country, then at war with England, for the possession of the empire of the New World. He had hardly ever permitted her to be out of his sight. He had forgotten, or seemed to have forgotten, all grave affairs of state, and with the terrible blindness that passion brings upon its servants, he had failed to notice that the elaborate ceremonies by which he sought to please her did but aggravate the strange malady from which she suffered. When she died he were, for a little time, like one bereft of reason. Indeed, there is no doubt but that he would have formally abdicated and retired to the great Trappist monastery at Granada, of which we were already titular prior, had he not been afraid to leave the little infant at the mercy of his brother, whose cruelty even in Spain were notorious, and who was suspected by many of having caused the Queen's death by means of a pair of poisoned gloves that he had presented to her on the occasion of her visiting his castle in Aragon. Even after the expiration of the 3 years of public mourning that had been ordained throughout his old dominion by royal edict, he would ne'er suffer his ministers to speak about any new alliances, and when the Emperor himself sent to him and offered him the hand of his lovely Archduchess of Bohemia, his niece, in marriage, he had bade the ambassador tell the master the King of Spain were already wedded to sorrow, and that though she were but a barren bride, he loved her better than the beauty. An answer that cost his crown, the rich provinces of the Netherlands, which soon after, at the Emperor's instigation, revolted against him under the leadership of some fanatics of the Reformed Church. His whole married life, with its fierce, fiery-coloured joys and the terrible agonies of its sudden ending, seemed to come back to him today as he watched the Infanta playing on the terrace. She had all the Queen's pretty petulance of manner, the same wilful way of toss of her head, the same proud, curved, beautiful mouth, the same wonderful smile, le sourire de France indeed, as she glanced up now and then at the window, and stretched out her hand for the stately Spanish gentleman to kiss. But the shrill laughter of the children grated on his ears, and the bright, pitiless sunlight mocked his sorrows. The dull odour of strange spices, such as embalmers use, seemed to taint, or were it fancy, the clear morning air. He buried his face in his hands, and when the Infanta looked up again, the curtains had been drawn, the king had retired. She made a little moue of disappointment, and shrugged her shoulders. Surely he might have stayed with her on her birthday. What did the stupid state of affairs matter? Or had he gone to that gloomy chapel where the candles was always burning, and where she was ne'er allowed to enter? How silly of him when the sun was shining so brightly, and everybody were happy. Besides, he would miss the sham bullfighting, for which the trumpet were already sounding, to say nothing of the puppet shows and the other wonderful things. Her uncle and the Grand Inquisitor were much more sensible. They had come out onto the terrace, and each paid her nice compliments. So she tossed her pretty head, and, taking Don Pedro by the hand, she walked slowly down the steps towards a long pavilion of purple silk that had been erected at the end of the garden. The other children followed in strict order of precedence, those who had the longest names going first. A procession of noble boys, fantastically dressed as toreadors, came out to meet her, and the young Count of Tierra Nueva, a wonderfully handsome lad of about 14 years of age, and covering his head with all the grace of a born hidalgo and a grandee of Spain, led her solemnly into a little gilt and ivory chair that was placed on the raised dais above the arena. The children grouped themselves all round, fluttering their big fans and whispering to each other, and Don Pedro and the Grand Inquisitor just stood laughing at the entrance. Even the Duchess, Camarera Mayor as she was called, a thin hard-featured woman with a yellow ruff, did not look quite so bad-tempered as usual, and something like a chill smile flitted across her wrinkled face and twitched her thin bloodless lips. I'll stop there for the moment because we're about to enter in the ad break. But yeah. Ooh, I'm gonna have a quick drink of water. This is my habit. I seem to be slipping back in my head a bit. Yep, fair enough, I bet. Oh. Yeah, fair. Oh. I needed that, thanks. Oh. You know what I need better than I do, go. Yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, I'm falling into my head a bit reading this. Yeah, well, fair enough. Important to keep yourself limber. At least not so curled up as you can't straighten up when you need to. But yeah. Falling on my head a little bit as I'm reading this. I don't know why. It's not particularly... I'm not sure whether to say engaging or unengaging, really. Either one might account for it, I suppose. But no, I think I'm just struggling to focus a bit on it. Strange. Oh well. We'll get through anyway. These are a bit longer than I remember them being. Probably should have checked how long each one was, shouldn't I? That would have been smart. Oh, we're in a break, let's give it a look now, shouldn't we? Young King with 22 pages, this one's 30. The next one is 52. And the last one, the Star Child, not quite so long. Only 23. Yeah. I don't think we're getting through all of these today. I think I was wrong. The Star Child is going to be, well, 50. Lord, it's going to be very long indeed. It's going to be as much as the last two we've done together. And I don't know, I'm just not feeling it as much. I don't know why I'm not. Well, no, I do know. It's not, I should say. There's no reason I'm feeling it outside of my own head, really. My head's just in that sort of a way. The books themselves is fine, there's no problem with them. I always feel bad when that's the case, you know what I mean? Like I'm not doing the books fair enough, or giving them a fair enough shake, because of the lack of equal attention given them. Still, yeah, I think it's annoying because I did want to go long tonight. I've been meaning to do another sort of longer, sort of 3-4 hour stream this last little while, but I just, it's just not in it. It's annoying. You can't do that. That should be the end of the ad break anyway. So yeah, for those of you who were in ads while I said it, I don't think I'm going to be able to get through all of these tonight. They're longer than I expected, especially the next one, which is the fisherman and his soul. So I think I'm not going to get through it, but we'll push through this one. We'll push through the birthday of the Infanta, and then we'll see how we stand there. But I suspect I might end after that. So sorry if you had I don't know. Christ. Ugh, my head's suddenly gone all to pieces. I don't know why. Bleh. Bleh. Right. Let's press on, shall we? It certainly were a marvellous bullfight, and much nicer, the Infanta thought, than the real bullfight that she had been brought to see at Seville on the occasion of the visit of the Duke of Parma to her father. Some of the boys pranced about on richly caparisoned hobby horses, brandishing long javelins with gay streamers of bright ribbons attached to them. Others went on foot, waving their scarlet cloaks before the bull, and vaulting lightly over the barrier when he charged them. And as for the bull himself, he was just like a live bull, though we were only made of wicker work and stretched hard, and sometimes insisted on running around the arena on his iron legs, which no live bull ever dreams of doing. He made a splendid fight of it too, and the children got so excited that they stood upon the benches and waved their lace handkerchiefs and cried out, "Bravo, Toro! Bravo, Toro!" just as sensibly as if they had been a real grown-up people. At last, however, after a prolonged combat, during which several of the hobby horses was gored through and through, and their riders dismounted, the young Count of Tierra Nueva brought the bull to his knees, and having obtained permission from the Infanta to give the coup de grace, he plunged his wooden sword into the neck of the animal with such violence that the head come right off, and disclosed a laughing face, a little Monsieur de Lorraine, son of the French ambassador at Madrid. The arena was then cleared amidst much applause, and the dead hobby horses dragged solemnly away by two Moorish pages in yellow and black liveries. And after a short interlude, during which a French posture master performed upon the tightrope, some Italian puppets appeared in a semi-classical tragedy of Sophonisba on the stage of a small theatre that had been built up for the purpose. They acted so well, and their gestures were so extremely natural, that at the close of the play the eyes of the Infanta were quite dim with tears. Indeed, some of the children really cried, and had to be comforted with sweetmeats, and the Grand Inquisitor himself was so affected that he could not help saying to Don Pedro that it seemed to him intolerable that things made simply out of wood and coloured wax, and worked mechanically by wires, should be so unhappy and meet with such terrible misfortune. An African juggler followed. He brought in a large flat basket covered with a red cloth. Having placed it in the centre of the arena, he took from his turban a curious reed pipe and blew through it. And in moments the cloth began to move. As the pipe grew shriller and shriller, two green and gold snakes put out their strange wedge-shaped heads and rose slowly up, swaying to and fro with the music as a plant sways in the water. The children, however, was rather frightened by the spotted hoods and quick darting tongues, and was much more pleased when the juggler made a tiny orange tree grow out of the sand that bare pretty white blossoms and clusters of real fruit, and when he took the fan of the little daughter of the Marquise de las Torres and changed it into a blue bird that flew all round the pavilion and sang. Their delight and amazement knew no bounds. A solemn minuet, too, performed by the dancing boys from the church of Nuestra Senora del Pilar. Charming. Infanta had never before seen this wonderful ceremony, which takes place every year at Maytime in front of the high altar of the Virgin, and in her honour, and indeed none of the royal family of Spain had entered the great cathedral of Saragossa since a mad priest, supposed by many to have been in the pay of Elizabeth of England, had tried to administer a poison wafer to the Prince of the Asturias. So she knew only of hearsay of Our Lady's Dance, as it were called. They certainly were a beautiful sight. The boys wore old-fashioned court dresses of white velvet, and their curious three-cornered hats were fringed with silver and surmounted with huge pictures of plumes of ostrich feathers. The dazzling whiteness of their costumes, as they moved about in the sunlight, being still more accentuated by their swarthy faces and long black hair. Everybody were fascinated by the grave dignity with which they moved through the intricate figures of the dance, and by the elaborate grace of their slow gesture and stately bows. And when they had finished their performance and doffed their great plumed hats, said the Infanta, she acknowledged their reverence with much courtesy, and made a vow that she would send a large wax candle to the shrine of Our Lady of Pilar, in return for the pleasure that she had been given. A troop of Anton Egyptians, as the gypsies were termed in those days, then advanced into the arena, and sitting down crossed legs in a circle, began to play softly upon their zithers, moving their bodies to the tune, and humming low, almost below their breath, a low dreamy air. When they caught sight of Don Pedro, they scowled at him, and some of them looked terrified, for only a few weeks before he had had 2 of their tribe hanged for sorcery in the marketplace at Seville. But the pretty Infanta charmed them as she leaned back, peeping over her fan with her great blue eyes, and they felt sure that one so lovely as she was could never be cruel to anybody. So they played on very gently, just touching the cords of the zithers with their long pointed nails, and their heads began to nod as though they were falling asleep. Suddenly, with a cry so shrill that all the children were startled, and Don Pedro's hand clutched at the great agate pommel of his dagger, they leapt to their feet and whirled madly around the enclosure, beating their tamburs and chanting some wild love song in their strange guttural language. Then at another signal they all flung themselves again to the ground and lay there quite still, the dull strumming of the zithers being the only sound that broke the silence. After they had done that several times, they disappeared for a moment, and come back leading a brown shaggy bear by a chain, and carrying on their shoulders some little Barbary apes. The bear stood upon his head with the utmost gravity, and the wizened apes played all kinds of amusing tricks. The 2 gypsy boys, who seemed to be their masters, fought with tiny swords, fired off guns, and went through a regular soldier's drill, just like the king's own bodyguards. In fact, the gypsies were a great success. But the funniest part of the old morning's entertainment were undoubtedly the dancing of the little dwarf. When he stumbled into the arena, waddling on his crooked legs and wagging his huge misshapen head from side to side, the children went off into a loud shout of delight, and the Infanta herself laughed so much that Camarera were obliged to remind her that although there were many precedents in Spain for a king's daughter weeping for her equals, there were none for the princess of the blood royale making so many before those who were her inferiors in birth. The dwarf, however, were really quite irresistible, and even at the Spanish court always noted for its cultivated passion for the horrible. So fantastic a little monster had never been seen. It was his first appearance too. He had been discovered only the day before, running wild through the forest, by 2 of the nobles who happened to have been hunting in a remote part of the great corkwood that surrounded the town, and be carried off by them to the palace as a surprise for the Infanta. His father, who were a poor charcoal burner, being but too well pleased to get rid of so ugly and useless a child. Perhaps the most amusing thing about him was his complete unconsciousness of his own grotesque appearance. Indeed, he seemed quite happy and full of the highest spirits. When the children laughed, he laughed as freely and as joyously as any of them. At the close of each dance, he made them each the funniest of bows, smiling and nodding, and then, just as if he were really one of themselves and not a little misshapen thing that nature, in some humorous mood, had fashioned for the others to mock. As to the Infanta, she absolutely fascinated him. He could not keep his eyes off her, and seemed to dance for her alone. And when, at the close of the performance, remembering how she had seen the great ladies of the court throw bouquets to Carafelli, the famous Italian treble, whom the Pope had sent from his own chapel to Madrid, that he might cure the king's melancholy by the sweetness of his voice, she took out of her hair the beautiful white rose, partly for a jest, partly to tease the Cavaleran, threw it to him across the arena with her sweetest smile. He took the whole matter quite seriously, pressing the flower to his coarse lips, put his hand upon his arm, and sank to one knee before her, grinning from ear to ear, and with his bright eyes sparkling with pleasure. This so upset the gravity of the Infanta that she kept on laughing long after the little dwarf had run out of the arena, and expressed a desire to her uncle that the dance should be immediately repeated. The Camarera, however, on the plea that the sun were too hot. Hey Layla, good to have you. Yeah, good to have you drop in. We're right in the middle right now of the birthday of the Infanta, which is probably going to be our last story. But as we are currently in following the birthday celebrations of the Infanta, who is the young princess of Spain. We have seen that her father is still in mourning for her mother, a French one, who died 12 years ago. And we've just been following their celebrations, which has had a mock bullfight, some puppets, some musicians, and just now a dwarf. Doing pretty well overall. Yeah. Let's call it. Probably doing pretty well. Hope you're doing well as well. Thank you for stopping by, I appreciate it. Where was I? Right. It so upset the gravity of the Infanta that she kept on laughing long after the little dwarf had run out the arena, expressed a desire to her uncle that the dance should be immediately repeated. The camarera, however, on the plea that the sun was too hot, decided it would be better that her highness should return without delay to the palace, where a wonderful feast had already been prepared for her, including a real birthday cake with her own initials worked all over it in painted sugar, and a lovely silver flag waving from the top. The Infanta accordingly rose up with much dignity, and having given orders that the little dwarf would have danced again for her after the hours of siesta, and conveyed her thanks to the young Count of Tierra Nueva for his charming reception, she went back to her apartments, the children following in the same order in which they had entered. Now, when the little dwarf heard that he would have danced a second time before the Infanta, and by her own express command, he was so proud that he ran out into the garden, kissing the white rose in an absurd ecstasy of pleasure, and making the most uncouth and clumsy gestures of delight. The flowers were quite indignant at his daring to intrude in their beautiful eye, and when they saw him capering and up and down the walks and waving his arms above his head in such a ridiculous manner, they could not restrain their feeling any longer. "He is really far too ugly to be allowed to play in any place where we are," cried the tulips. "He should drink poppy juice and go to sleep for 1,000 years," said the great scarlet lilies, and they grew quite hot and angry. "He is a perfect horror," screamed the cactus, "but he is twisted and stumpy, and his hair is completely out of proportion with his legs. Really, he makes me feel prickly all over, and if he comes near me I will sting him with all my thorns." "And he has actually got one of my best blooms," exclaimed the white rose tree. "I gave it to the Infanta this morning myself as a birthday present, and he has stolen it from her." And she called out, "Thief! Thief! Thief!" at the top of her voice. Even the red geraniums, who did not usually give themselves airs, and were known to have a great many poor relations themselves, came up in disgust when they saw him, and when the violets meekly remarked that though he was certainly extremely plain, still he could not help it, they retorted with a good deal of justice that that was his chiefest defect. There was no reason why one should admire a person because he were incurable. And indeed, some of the violets themselves felt that the ugliness of the little dwarf were almost ostentatious, and that he would have been shown much better taste if he had looked sad, or at least pensive, instead of jumping about merrily and throwing himself into such grotesque and silly attitudes. As for the old sundial, who were an extremely remarkable individual, and had once told the time of day to no less a person than the Emperor Charles V himself, he was so taken aback by the little dwarf's appearance that he almost forgot to mark 2 whole minutes with his long shadowy finger, and could not help saying to the great milk-white peacock who was sunning herself on the balustrade, that everyone knew that the children of kings were kings, and the children of charcoal burners were charcoal burners, and that it was absurd to pretend that it weren't so, a statement in which the peacock entirely agreed, and indeed screamed out, "Certainly, certainly," in such a loud, harsh voice, that the goldfish who lived in the basin of the cool splashing fountain put their heads out of the water and asked the huge stone tritons what on earth was the matter. But somehow the birds liked him. They had seen him off in the forest, dancing about like an elf rather than after the eddying leaves, or crouched upon the hollow of some old oak tree, sharing his nuts with the squirrels. They did not mind his being ugly a bit, or even the nightingale herself, who sung so sweetly in the orange groves at night that sometimes the moon leaned down to listen, were not much to look at after all. And besides, he had been kind to them during the terribly bitter winter when there were no berries on the trees, and the ground was hard as iron, and the walls had come down to the very gates of the city to look for food. He had ne'er once forgotten them, but always given them the crumbs out of his little lunch of black bread, and divided them with whatever poor breakfast he had. So they flew round and round him, just touching his cheek with their wings as they passed, and chatted to each other, and the little dwarf was so pleased that he could not help showing them the beautiful white rose, and telling them that the Infanta herself had given it to him because she loved him. They did not understand a single word of what he was saying, but that made no matter, for they put their heads on one side and looked wise, which is quite as good as understanding a thing, and very much easier. The lizards also took an immense fancy to him, and when he grew tired of running about and flung him down on the grass to rest, they played and romped all over him, and tried to amuse him in the best way they could. "Everyone cannot be as beautiful as a lizard," they cried. "That would be too much to expect. And though it sounds absurd to say so, he is really not so ugly after all, provided, of course, that one shuts one's eyes and does not look at him." The lizards were extremely philosophical by nature, and often sat thinking for hours and hours together when there were nothing else to do, or when the weather was too rainy for them to go out. The flowers, however, was excessively annoyed at their behaviour, and at the behaviour of the birds. It only shows, they said, what a vulgarising effect this incessant rushing and flying about has. Well-bred people always stay exactly in the same place as we do, and whenever they saw us hopping up and down the walls, or galloping madly throughout the grass after dragonflies, when we do want change of air, we send for the gardener, and he carries us to another bed. This is dignified, and as it should be. But birds and lizards have no sense of repose, and indeed, birds have not even a permanent address. They are mere vagrants, like the gypsies, and should be treated in exactly the same manner. So, they put their noses in the air, and looked very haughty, or quite delighted. And after some time they saw the little dwarf scramble up from the grass and make his way across the terrace to the palace. And at the moment, just need to kill someone. Bang! There we go. He should certainly be kept indoors with the rest of the natural life, they said. Look at his hunched back and his crooked legs. And they began to titter. The little dwarf knew nothing of all this. He liked the birds and the lizards immensely, thought the flowers were the most marvellous things in the whole world, except of course the Infanta, and that she had given them the beautiful white rose, and she loved them, and that made a great difference. How he wished that he had gone back with her. She would have put him on her right hand and smiled at him, and he would have never left her side, would have made her his playmate and taught her all kinds of delightful tricks. Though he had never been in a palace before, he knew a great many wonderful things. He could make little cages out of rushes for the grasshoppers to sing in, and fashion the long jointed bamboo into the pipe that Pan loves to hear. He knew the cry of every bird, and could call the starlings from the treetop or the heron from the mere. He knew the trail of every animal, could track the air by its delicate footprints, and the boar by the trampled leaves. All the wind dances he knew, the mad dance in red raiment with the autumn, the light dance in blue sandals over the corn, the dance with white snow wreaths in winter, and the blossom dance with the orchids in spring. He knew where the wood pigeons built their nests, and once when a fowler had snared the parent birds, he brought up the young ones himself, and had built a low dovecot for them in the cleft of the pollard elm. They was quite tame, and used to feed out of his hands every morning. She would like them, and the rabbits that scurried about in the long fern, and the jays with their steely feathers and black bills, and the hedgehogs that could curl themselves up in the prickly balls, and the great wise tortoises that crawled slowly about, shaking their heads and nibbling at the young leaves. Yes, she must certainly come to the forest and play with him. He would give her his own little bed, and would watch outside the window at dawn, to see that the wild horned cattle did not harm her, or the gaunt wolves creeped too nearly her. And at dawn he would tap the shutters and wake her, and they would go out and dance together all the day long. They were really not a bit lonely in the forest. Sometimes a bishop rode through on his white mule, reading out of a painted book. Sometimes in their green velvet caps and their jerkin of tanned deerskins, the falconers passed by, with little hawks on their wrists. At vintage time come the grape treaders with purple hands and feet, wreathed with glossy ivy and carrying dripping skins of wine. The charcoal burners sat round the huge braziers at night, watching the dry logs charring slowly in the fire, roasting chestnuts in the ashes. And the robbers came out of their caves and made merry with them. Once too he had seen a beautiful procession winding up the long dusty road to Toledo. The monks went in front, singing sweetly and carrying bright banners, crosses of gold. And then in silver armour, with matchlocks and pikes, come the soldiers. In their midst walked 3 barefoot men, in strange yellow dresses, painted all over with wonderful figures, and carrying lighted candles in their hands. Certainly there were a great deal to look at in the forest, and when she were tired he would find soft bank of moss for her, and carry her in his arms, for he were very strong, though he knew that he were not tall. He would make her a necklace of red birony berries, and that would be quite as pretty as the white berries that were on her dress. And when she were tired of them she could throw them away, and he would find her others. He would bring her acorn cups and dew-drenched anemones, tiny glowworms to be stars in the pale gold of her hair. But where was she? He asked the white rose, and it made him no answer. The old palace seemed asleep, and even when the shutters had not been closed, every set of curtains had been drawn across the windows to keep out the glare. He wandered all round, looking for some place through which he might gain an entrance. At last he caught sight of a little private door that was lying open. He slipped through and found himself in a splendid hall, far more splendid, he feared, than the forest. There was so much more gilding everywhere, and even the floor was made of great-coloured stone, fitted together in a sort of geometrical pattern. The little Infanta were not there, only some wonderful white statues that looked down on him from their jasper pedestals, with sad blank eyes and strangely smiling lips. At the end of the hall hung a nicely embroidered curtains of black velvet, pad with suns and stars, King's favourite devices, bound with the colour he loved best. Perhaps you were right behind that. He would try at any rate. So he stole quietly across and drew it aside. Now there only another room, a prettier room, he thought, than the one he had just left. The walls was hung with many figured green arrays of needles, of needle-work tapestry, representing the work of some Flemish artist who had spent more than 7 years in its composition. It had once been the chamber of Jean Le Fou, as he was called, the mad king who was so enamoured of the chase that he had often tried in his delirium to mount the huge rearing horse and drag down the stag, on which the great hounds were leaping, surrounding his open horn, and stab him with his dagger at the pale flying deer. They were now used as a council room, and on the centre table were lying the red portfolios of the ministers, stamped with the gold tulip of Spain, and with the armies and embalments of the House of Habsburg. The little dwarf looked in wonder all round him, and he were half afraid to go on. The little dwarf looked in wonder all around him and were half afraid to go on. The strange silent horsemen that galloped so swiftly through the long glades without making any noise seemed to him like those terrible phantoms of whom he had heard the charcoal burners speaking. The complachos, who hunt only at night, and if they meet a man turn him into an island and chase him. But he thought of the pretty Infanta and took courage. He wanted to find her alone, and tell her he too loved her. Perhaps she were in the room beyond. He ran across the Moorish carpets and opened the door. No, she was not there either. The room was quite empty. It was a throne room used for the reception of foreign ambassadors, when the king, which a late had not been often, consented to give them a personal audience. The same room in which, many years before, envoys had appeared from England to make arrangements for the marriage of their queen, then one of the Catholic sovereigns of Europe, with Europe's eldest son. The hangings were a gilt Cordovan leather, and every gilt chandelier with branches for 300 wax lights hung down from the black and white ceiling. Underneath a great canopy of gold cloth, on which the lions and towers of Castile were embroidered in sealed pearls, stood the throne itself, covered with a rich pale of black velvet, studded with silver tulips and elaborately fringed with silver and pearls. The second step of the throne was placed on kneeling ground the Infanta, which the kneeling stood of the Infanta with its cushions of cloth or silver tissue, and below that again, and beyond the limit of the canopy, stood the chair for the papal nuncio, who alone had the right to be seated in the king's presence on the occasion of any public ceremonial, and whose cardinal's hat, with its tangled scarlet tassel, lay on a purple tabouret in front. On the wall facing the throne hung a life-size portrait of Charles V, in hunting dress, with a great mastiff by his side, and a picture of Philip II receiving the homage of the Netherlands occupied the centre of the other wall. Between the windows stood a black ebony cabinet inlaid with plates of ivory, on which the figures from Alban's Dance of Death had been engraved by the hand, some said, of that famous master himself. But the little dwarf cared nothing for all this magnificence. He would not have given his rose for all the pearls in the canopy, nor one white petal of his rose for the throne itself. What he wanted was to see the Infanta before she went down to the pavilion, and to ask her to come away with him when she had finished his dance. Here in the palace the air was close and heavy, but in the forest the wind blew free, and the sunlight, with wandering hands of gold, moved the tremulous leaves aside. There was flowers too in the forest, not so splendid perhaps as the flowers in the garden, but more sweetly scented for all that. Hyacinths in early spring that flooded and waving purple, the cool glens and grassy knolls, yellow primroses that nestled in little clumps around the gnarled roots of the oak trees, bright celandine, blue speedwell and irises, lilac and gold. There was grey catkins on the hazels, the foxgloves drooped with the weight of their dappled bee cells. The chestnut and its spires are white stars, and the hawthorn was pallid moons of beauty. Yes, surely she would come if he could only find her. She would come with him to the fair forest, and all day long it would dance with delight. A smile lit up his eyes at the thought of this, and he passed into the next room. I paused for a moment to take a swallow of water. I'm flagging a bit here, Lord. I started this stream feeling really, really good and solid, like ready, yeah, let's go 4 hours, and all, like, God, I'm strung, I don't know what's up. A smile lit up his eyes at the thought, and he passed into the next room. Of all the rooms, this was the brightest and the most beautiful. The walls was covered with pink-flowered lucca damask, patterned with birds and dotted with dainty blossoms of silver. The furniture were massive silver, festooned with floral wreaths and swirling cupids. In front of the 2 large fireplaces stood great screens, broidered with parrots and peacocks, and the floor, which were a sea-green onyx, seemed to stretch far away into the distance. Nor were he alone. Standing under the shadow of the doorway at the extreme end of the room, he saw a little figure watching him. His heart trembled. A cry of joy broke from his lips, and he moved out into the sunlight. As he did so, the figure moved out also, and he saw it plainly. The Infanta. It were a monster, the most grotesque monster he had ever beheld. Not properly shaped, as all other people were, but hunchbacked and crooked-limbed, with a huge lolling head and mane of black hair. The little dwarf frowned, and the monster frowned also. He laughed, and it laughed with him, and held its hand to its side, just as he himself would do. He made it a mocking bow, and it returned to him a low reverence. He went towards it, and it came to meet him, copying each step that he made, and stopping when he stopped himself. He shouted with amusement and ran forward, and reached out his hand. The hand of the monster touched his, and it were cold as ice. He grew afraid, and moved his hand across. The monster's hand followed it quickly. He tried to press on, but something smooth and hard stopped him. The face of the monster was now close to his own, and seemed full of terror. He brushed his hair out of his eyes. He imitated it. He struck it, and it returned the blow for blow. He loathed it, and it made hideous faces at him. He drew back, and it retreated. What is it, he thought for a moment, and looked round at the rest of the room. It was strange, but everything seemed to have its double in this invisible wall of clear water. Yes, picture for picture, it were repeated, couch for couch. The sleeping form that lay in the alcove of the doorway had its twin brother that slumbered, and the silver Venus that stood in the sunlight held out her arms to a Venus as lovely as herself. Were it Echo? He had called to her once in the valley. She had answered him word for word. Could she mock the eye as she mocked the voice? Could she make a mimic of the words? Could she make a mimic world just like the real world? Could the shadow of things have colour and life and movement? Could it be that? He started, and then taking from his breast a beautiful white rose, he turned round and kissed it. The monster had a rose of its own, petal for petal the same. He kissed it with light kisses, and pressed it to its heart with horrible gestures. When the truth dawned upon him, he gave a wild cry of despair, and fell sullen to the ground. So he who won the shape and hunchbacked, vowed to look at him grotesque. He himself were the monster, and it were at him that all the children had been laughing. The little princess who he thought loved him, she too had merely been mocking his ugliness, making merry over his twisted limbs. Why had they not left him in the forest? There were no mirror to tell him how loathsome he was. Why had his father not killed him rather than sell him to his shame? The hot tears poured down his cheek, and tore the white rose to pieces. The sprawling monster did the same, and scattered the faint petals in the air. It grovelled on the ground, Dan, and we looked at it. We watched him with a face drawn with pain. He crept away, lest he should see it, and covered his eyes with his hands. He crawled like some wounded thing into the shadow and lay there moaning. And at that moment the Infanta herself come in with her companions through the open window. And when they saw the ugly little dwarf lie on the ground and beating the floor with his clenched hands, in the most fantastic and exaggerated manner, they went off in a shout of happy laughter, and stood all round him and watched him. His dancing was funny, said the Infanta, but his acting is funnier still. Indeed, he is almost as good as the puppets, only of course not quite so natural. And she fluttered her big fan and applauded. The dwarf now looked up, and his sobs grew fainter and fainter. Suddenly he gave a curious gasp, and clutched his sword, and then he fell back again and lay quite still. That is capital, said the Infanta after a pause. But now you must dance for me. Yes, cried all the children, you must get up and dance, for you are as clever as the Barbary apes and much more ridiculous. The little dwarf made no answer, and the Infanta stamped her foot and called out to her uncle, who were walking on the terrace with the chamberlain, reading some dispatches that had just arrived from Mexico, where the Holy Office had been recently established. My funny little dwarf is sulking, she cried. You must wake him up and tell him to dance for me. They smiled at each other and sauntered in, and Don Pedro stooped down and slapped the dwarf on the cheek with his embroidered glove. You must dance, he said, petite monster. You must dance. The Infanta of Spain and the Indies wishes to be amused. And the little dwarf never moved. A whipping master should be sent for, said Don Pedro wearily. He went back to the terrace. The chamberlain looked grave, and he knelt beside the little dwarf, and put his hand upon his arm. And after a few moments he shrugged his shoulders and rose up, and having made a low bow to the Infanta, he said, Mi bella princessa, your funny little dwarf will never dance again. It is a pity, for he is so ugly that he might have made the king smile. But why will he not dance again? Said the Infanta, laughing. Because his heart is broken, said the chamberlain. And the Infanta frowned, her dainty rose-leaf lips curled in pretty disdain. For the future, I let those who come to play with me have no hearts, she cried, and she ran out into the garden. And that's the end of the birthday of the Infanta. A cruel story, and a sad one. All of Oscar Wilde's children's stories seem to be very sad indeed. This one isn't even it's certainly not the highlight of those, given some of the stuff that was in the first one, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah, certainly not the saddest one we've seen, but a distinctly sad one as well. I'm trying to think what we can really draw from that moral-wise, but other than the Infanta being a terrible... Well, I guess there's the moral, isn't it? Royalty is spoiled monsters who do horrible things. But it does feel that seeing the little poor, which got disfigured boy, lived just long enough to believe he is loved, realise that he is horrible, that he is disfigured, realise that his love is false, and then weep and cry himself to death in front of the person whom mere moments before he thought loved him. It's a bit of a direct and harsh way to tell that, especially since it is a way meant to be aimed at children. Also, there was the stuff with the king still having his wife's embalmed body preserved and kept in a cathedral 12 years ago, and potentially his brother having poisoned her, which was established at the start of the story and then just didn't really come up afterwards. That one was actually a bit bizarre, actually. The ending feels like most of the other Wilde stories. Most of the rest of them were more sort of focused on their one particular subject matter. So I guess maybe again it just does serve to illustrate the fact that royals are bad and strange and sort of twisted. So I guess that does add some credence to that being the moral. Right, but yeah, let's head back over here then for now, shall we? So yeah, I've basically done my little summary now, actually, haven't I? Which I guess is a little bit of a waste since I don't have done to it. But yeah, my head is just I don't know what's going on with it really, but I can't focus for the life of me. Annoying, but yeah. What no? I think it's finished. Yeah. Yes, I will. It's fine. I mean, it's not. This isn't unknown to me. It happens sometimes. Maybe it's just like that. Still, we push through a couple of stories. We'll pick them up another day. Maybe do something else in between to give us a break. Oh, I am. This isn't like an eating thing. This is just my head sometimes does this. Goes in cycles. I've eaten just as much cheese as I always do. Yeah, you're very welcome to the stream. I hope you've enjoyed it, everyone. Again, sorry for the abrupt cut off, but I think if I do another one, I will stop halfway through it, and that'll be no good for anyone at all. So, yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you again for stopping by, Layla. I'm very happy to have you. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. I'll probably be back tomorrow for something. If I'm still doing rough, I'll do something short, but you know, we'll manage something. Because I want to, and because I've decided that I'm going to do my 100th stream on Tuesday, so I've got to do a stream every day until then. Even if it's just something like that. Yeah. I always do appreciate everyone stopping by, and I hope that you have a lovely a lovely amount of time until the end of my next stream, when you will have to be returned and be here to get my blessing, as we've established. I like this funny little gimmick of mine, so I'm sticking by it. But I do genuinely hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And I thank you all for watching, and as always, ta-ra.